All right, welcome. Good to see everybody. I'm J.R. Dukes, your host. I want to extend a warm welcome to all my free minded friends out there. We are going live right now. We just want to make sure everything is working before we start diving in. Hope everybody has had a good day today. I know on the West Coast you're still having your day. We're over here in Florida, so it's 5 o'clock local Eastern Standard Time. And it looks like everything is working as you should. Come on in and say hello. Go ahead and let me know where you're from. I like to know where everybody's from. We generally have folks from all over the world, so it's always good to get to meet everybody and get to know where you're from. And of course, it's Kim. I always appreciate you showing up, and I'm glad everything is working fine. And it looks like we're good. We have our friends on X/Twitter, of course, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitch. It looks like it's all working the way it should. It's the way I like to see it. Hey, I want to try a new thing. I'm getting familiar with everybody's from. If you haven't told me where you're from before, go ahead and take a second to fill it in. I want to also start, when we have these live chats, I want to start a little segment where we just get to know each other a little bit better. So to make it quick and easy, are you a dog person or a cat person? Or maybe neither, I don't know. Or maybe you have some kind of other pet that you prefer. Myself, I like dogs and cats, but if I had to pick only one, I'd probably go the dog route. I have a little Chihuahua, and he keeps me company. Can't keep him in here when I'm doing a live stream because if he gets distracted, he'll let me know about it pretty easy. So if you're so inclined, put it down in there. Okay, we got Yvonne loves dogs. Yeah, I think that's going to be I think that's going to be the majority. Of course, I have some neighbors that love cats. That's for sure. All right. Folks, what a busy news day today has turned out to be, right? Great news for former President Donald Trump. We have some breaking news, believe it or not, even in the Fani Willis case. Sweet Fani Willis is how I like to refer to her. There's some breaking news there we're going to get into in just a second. We're going to briefly talk about the current Republican nomination for the 2024 presidential election between former President Donald Trump and Nikki Haley. And finally, we are going to also just touch briefly on Biden's age. To me, it's not even really so much his age. I don't think age is it. Do you? I think it's more along the lines of having to do with what's his mental faculties, what's going on upstairs. Because I know many individuals that are in their 70s, 80s, and I don't know if I know many people in their 90s, but generally they are sharper than me sometimes. I think it depends on the individual, and it's really hard to argue that our President Joe Biden, is not suffering some kind of serious cognitive disability, and that's just the way that I see it. So I will tell you this: being our president, we need to go ahead and I'm just reading the comments here real quick. Yeah. Oh no, hater kittens. Oh my goodness. Yeah, that would kind of steer me away from the cats too, Yvonne. I'm the same way. Anyway, what I was saying is it has to do much more with someone's mental acuity, how well they can perform their job. I don't really care about how old they are. I care about if they can do the job or not do the job. That's what it is as far as I'm concerned. And even though I may not agree with President Joe Biden, I encourage you to join me in frankly praying for his good health. I sincerely hope he stays in good health and is able to maintain his job, because the alternative is absolutely scary, which of course would mean President Kamala Harris. What a scary thought. I really pray for Joe Biden's health daily. I can honestly promise you that I do want to see him able to at least finish out his term. I will be having a series of videos coming out that I'm actually working on already, and I'm going to take a deep dive and a focus. And the title of the series is going to be something real simple. It's basically going to be, can Joe Biden make it? If he was to be reelected, what are the odds that he would make it another 4, I guess now 5 years? Considering he's 81 now, he'd be 82 if he was sworn in again as president. And then he would be, 86 when he left office. So I have got some interesting statistics. I went to the New York Department of Health and some other places that have statistics on life expectancy. If you're a such and such age, living in a particular area, and you have some health issues or whatever going on, what are the odds that you're going to live 4 more years? It's kind of an interesting deep dive. So I want to take a look at that. Also, let me go ahead and pull this up so y'all can get an idea where I'm going with this. All right. Right here, we have the Supreme Court decision today. I have the actual document from the Supreme Court, went to their website, and I downloaded it. My intention is for all of us to review it together. I also have some personal notes that I have taken on this particular matter because it's interesting. I don't know if you've ever taken an opportunity to read the 14th Amendment, but we might not read every piece of it today, but we sure are going to review the important parts. I think it's important to understand how we got to this point and exactly what did the Supreme Court say or not say in relation to this particular decision. I will say that in this decision, they definitely took their time doing it, which in my opinion only gives me more hope that the Supreme Court really understands the injustice going on with President Donald Trump, and they are using their ability, they have a lot of latitude deciding how fast they want a case to move or how slow they want a case to move. And the fact that they have taken such a long time in issuing this decision the day before Super Tuesday. And by the way, of course, tomorrow's Super Tuesday. Don't forget, it's going to be a big day tomorrow. Lots to go over tomorrow for sure with the Super Tuesday results and whatnot. But think about this. They waited to the last day before they went ahead and decided to release the decision. Why would they do that? I've heard people say, well, they were probably trying to find a way to all come to a consensus and speak with one voice, and it took some time to do that. And I can buy that. I get that. However, I don't think that's the whole story. My humble opinion is maybe even including the 3 liberal justices on the court, I think there's a better than even chance that they realize that the injustice going on with Donald Trump, whether he's Democrat, whether he's Republican, it really doesn't matter what he is. The fact that he's being targeted by this lawfare cannot stand, and it has to be snuffed out. Our founding fathers were very wise people, in my opinion, inspired by God himself to establish and start this great nation that we have. And today is just a prime example of why they set things up the way they did. Because as I've said on my program many times, it's up to the Supreme Court, which is kind of scary and reassuring at the same time. Clearly, they realize the importance of this particular decision, this particular moment in history. Can you imagine what would have happened had they ruled that Donald Trump could be removed off the ballot? There was no due process for this man, and that basically means there was no trial in which he was convicted and said, sir, you are an insurrectionist. Therefore, the 14th Amendment kicks in and we're going to remove you from the ballot. That never happened. That's called due process. And there's so many other little things that are a very serious and grave concern. The last time this has happened in American history was the year 1860, right before the American Civil War. And the candidate that was removed off the ballot was Abraham Lincoln. You had the Democratic type states removing Abraham Lincoln, and then you had the other side removing whoever the candidate was running against him. And we know what that led to. Very fortunate that they came out with the right decision here. So anyway, without further ado, let's go ahead and let's get back into the first video that we got for today, and let's take a quick peek at it here. So give me 1 second. We're going to switch over. If you have any questions or comments, as I always say, put them in the comments because I'd love to see what you got going on. This looks like it's going to work actually pretty easy. So let's go ahead and get into the very first video that we have for today. And I think I'm going to switch the screen, though, to make sure the volume comes through right. Give me 1 second. And we're just going to take a quick minute and reach over to the other screen. Okay, here we go. All right, this first video is simply just going to be a recap of what I just said, that the Supreme Court fortunately decided to go ahead and issue that ruling we were just talking about and allow Donald Trump to stay on the ballot. Thank goodness for that. Okay, Supreme Court, here we go. Boom, boom. With the software that I use, you have to use the Chrome software. Oh, by the way, I'm about to put a link in here. If y'all want to join or chat, I just dropped the link in there. Just make sure you have the Chrome browser. That reminded me. Make sure you have the Chrome browser. Make sure you have let's see, what is it? Chrome browser, microphone, and just a headset. Something like I got set up. You don't have to have a fancy microphone or anything like that. It's not necessary. Oh, Kim, you're such a sweet woman. I love seeing you and having you in here all the time. You're spoiling me with all these super chats, young lady. I appreciate that. Thanks, Kim. What a sweetheart. All right. Thank you again, honey. I appreciate that. Y'all are so great. Thanks, Kim. Appreciate all y'all that support me. It is very kind of you, and it's definitely appreciated. Okay, let's get into this first video, and let's take a peek at it. Let me know if you have any questions.
The Supreme Court unanimously restored former President Donald Trump to presidential primary ballots. The court said that states do not have the authority to disqualify candidates from the ballot, invoking a constitutional provision that was adopted after the Civil War. The court said only Congress can do that when it comes to candidates for Congress, and it said especially the presidency. The outcome is a big victory for the former president, who is the leading Republican candidate for the presidential nomination of his party. The outcome ends efforts in Colorado, Maine, Illinois, and elsewhere to kick the former president off the ballot because of his role in trying to overturn his 2020 election loss. That, of course, culminated in the January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol. The Colorado Supreme Court had ruled that Trump's involvement in those efforts amounted to inciting an insurrection, and that therefore he was ineligible to be president under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, and also ineligible to be on the ballot. Following the ruling, Colorado Secretary of State Jenna Griswold said she was disappointed with the outcome, but acknowledged that Donald Trump is eligible to be on the state's primary ballot. Colorado is among 16 states having presidential contests on Super Tuesday, just a day from now.
All right. That pretty well is a good summary. I like that video just because, well, it's a good summary. So let's go ahead and get into the next one right here. And also, we're going to take a deep dive into the 14th Amendment. As I said, I got the text printed out. We're going to review that together. Let's just go ahead. There's a few things I want to scan. And I got something funny to show you, too, that I thought was hilarious pertaining to President Joe Biden. Maybe you've seen it, maybe you have not seen it, but I like it. I always like a little humor. You know what I'm saying? You got to lighten stuff up, especially with all the stuff going on in the world today. It definitely doesn't hurt to lighten it up with a little bit of humor. So anyway, here is our next video. This time we're going to visit our friends at Fox News, and let's see what they got to say. Here we go.
To speak at any minute, and you see this is Mar-a-Lago. On the bottom of your screen, that's where we expect to see the former president. And obviously, that's the U.S. Supreme Court in the top box to the right there. The Supreme Court's huge, unanimous decision today reversed Colorado's decision to ban Donald Trump from its primary ballot. All 9 justices ruled in favor of Trump in this case, which will impact the status of efforts in several other states to remove Trump from their respective ballots. For instance, we know in Illinois and Maine, they were already planning to do that too. So all of this ahead of Super Tuesday, which is tomorrow. This ruling is huge. And we've already heard from his camp, it's a big win for America. This is Outnumbered. I'm Harris Faulkner, here with you today. My co-host, Kayleigh McEnany, and Emily Compagno, also television host and author Kim Douglas, and Fox and Friends first co-host Todd Pyro. All right, Todd, I'm going to start with you. Just first of all, the legalities of this, spell them out, and how much of a victory is this for Trump?
It is a tremendous victory. And in our coverage starting at 10 o'clock this morning, one point was made over and over. This is not just a decision that applies to Colorado. This does apply to all the other states that are going to try this. Whether it was Turley, whether it was McCarthy, or whether it was Shannon Breed, that point was made over and over again. But why the...
Just a quick reference. Remember, this has to do with Anderson versus Trump. Technically, I think reverse that. It's Trump versus Anderson. It has to do with the state of Colorado, but they also removed him. Secretary of State in Maine removed President Donald Trump. And recently, like in the last day or two, unbelievably, the state of Illinois, a judge there ruled him ineligible to be removed off the ballot. These people are just nuts, but this will cover everything because the Supreme Court was very clear in their decision. And again, we'll take a look at that very soon.
Underlying decision is so important for our country. Instinctually, everybody on this couch knew that what Colorado was trying to do was fundamentally wrong from a democracy perspective. We cannot have some random state bureaucrat decide because they have an animus against Donald Trump that the rest of the country cannot put him in office as president if they so choose. And the 9-0 decision made that abundantly clear. Those justices, the liberal ones, certainly don't like Donald Trump, but the decision here had to be 9-0 for the sake of, wait for it, Harris, democracy.
Well, and you know, Emily, one thing that Jonathan Turley and Andrew Trzaskowski, who was also with me last hour, we were all talking about is that we are one voice coming from the U.S. Supreme Court. And we are not all one voice in the United States of America right now. We're divided. They showed us what unity looks like around a purpose and a mission.
Yeah, you know what I love about this opinion, which I have in my hand right here, is how clear it is.
Yeah.
Anyone can read this opinion and understand exactly the logic behind the Supreme Court's unanimous ruling. And to your point, what we all expected, because this is exactly what the Constitution stands for. And what I love the most as well, their opening line as they come out, because the Constitution makes Congress, rather than the states, responsible for enforcing Section 3 against federal office holders and candidates, we reverse. And they go on to explain that the 14th Amendment expanded federal power at the expense of state autonomy. So this entire decision is essentially saying, look, at the end of the day, you are trying to apply something in Section 3 within the 14th Amendment to give states a little bit more power. But nay, that is from Congress. And ultimately, they say, because of the people. And we talked about a lot that the fear, the tragedy that might happen if they ruled in a different way. And it was the patchwork application. Remember, it was the fact that why can Colorado have an impact on what people in South Carolina decide? That the reason or the reasoning is absolutely not they can't, that at the end of the day, the patchwork that would likely result from state enforcement would sever the direct link that the framers found so critical between the national government and the people of the United States as a whole. Nothing in the Constitution, they say, requires that we endure such chaos, arriving at any time or different times up to and perhaps beyond the inauguration.
Well, we've seen a lot of chaos. And part of the problem has been people have, you know, continued to lose trust in government agencies and elections on that list too. So, and I don't know, I'm going to ask the team, do we have that map that showed the patchwork that Emily mentioned? We had it late last week. I mean, it really showed how divided the country would be all over the place. Like maybe one state, Trump's name would be on the ballot. The other state, no, this state is fighting to get his name.
Take a look at this map right here. This is just as of today. There was a lot more states that were considering removing President Donald Trump off of the ballot. But this map clearly shows Trump disqualification reversed by SCOTUS, Supreme Court of the United States, is what that stands for. So California, Colorado, New Mexico, Wisconsin, Illinois, South Dakota, North Dakota, Virginia, New York, and Maine. And I believe right below New York, maybe that is actually, never mind. That is just that's Long Island I'm looking at. I was thinking it might have been Connecticut, but no, it's not. So these are the places right here that were removing President Donald Trump, or I should say had removed President Donald Trump, or at least it was in the process of him being removed. And now with this decision today, that's it. That's over. They, as who is that, Piggy Pig would say? I forgot that cartoon. That's all, folks. It's not gonna happen. They were very clear. When we look into the decision, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. And one other thing I want to tell you about this map, it doesn't cover them all. The states that are going to decide this presidential election are also included in this count, or some of them anyways. Basically, the states that are going to determine the next president is Colorado. You have Wisconsin, and then right here you have Michigan. Georgia, believe it or not, is a swing state this year, and then finally Pennsylvania. So you got a few of those states that are hit right there. Just kind of keep that in mind as we're looking at this. And in a minute, we're going to switch right over and we're going to go through the 14th Amendment. So let's continue.
I mean, it would not have been a helpful situation for voters. And I think, you know, Kayleigh, we want to make it as easy as possible for people to express their voices because the time is critical. That's an even better look at it. All the states with lawsuits to bar Trump from the ballot, and it's all over the place. The pending are in yellow.
So I'm so glad you brought up this map. When you go to page 9 of this opinion, footnote 3, there is a jarring statement in the opinion. We are aware of just one example of state enforcement against a would-be federal officer, and it was in, get this, 1868. The reason I bring that up, so this has been used once in 1868, but you just showed that map of states, the patchwork, Where is the brazenness of these judges, of these Secretary of
That's a great
States who think
question.
we can do things that have been done once in United States history? And not just brazenness. You look at Colorado, where they said you can't even write in the candidate. You look at
I don't know about you, but to me, it really smacks of hubris that these people think they can just go ahead and say, hey, I know better than you. I'm going to tell you who you can vote for president of the United States. Is that not just beat all? These people really think that they know what's best for all of us. And it's just part of the liberal democratic tradition, at least recently in the last 10, 20 years. They know better than you, and they're going to make you do what they think you should do. It's just the way they see the world, and that ain't going to work out for me. And Stephen, I appreciate your comment here. I'm not sure exactly what filing you're talking about. I did hear that there was a filing that took place that was additional information. The breaking news that I had for today, and hopefully we'll have time to get into it during this live stream or later on this evening. However, there's two things that are breaking news. There, believe it or not, out of all of the problems that they have at the DA's office there in Fulton County, one of the problems that they have right now is that hackers have taken over their computers. And if they don't pay the ransom, they said something to the effect of there's some very interesting additional paperwork they're going to start releasing. I have not heard that reported in the mainstream legacy media. Have y'all? So we'll have to see where that goes. The other thing I wanted to tell you that's breaking news is the Georgia State Senate has subpoenaed Ashleigh Merchant, who, of course, is the attorney that started all this, who represents Michael Roman, one of the defendants in the so-called Trump RICO case. They want her to come in with documents in her hand this Wednesday and give testimony because they, if you remember, are looking in to Fani, Willis, Nathan Wade, and the Fulton County DA's office and any malfeasance that may have been taking place over there. I think they're also looking into let's put it this way, it's just general corruption. And that's just the Georgia Senate. Remember, the Georgia House also has a 22-count impeachment pending against sweet Fani Willis. Finally, the breaking news I did have today is that Delta Airlines has turned over additional information. I don't know, Stephen, if that's the same thing you're talking about, but they did turn over additional information today to the court pertaining to the tickets purchased, used by, whatever the proper wording is, Fani Willis and Nathan Wade and their flights. I'm sure that these type of documents are going to be to impeach someone's testimony, aka convince the judge somebody committed perjury. It's not too hard to figure out exactly what's going on in this case. Nowadays, there's too many cameras, too many records, too many electronic records. Everybody knows they're lying. It's just a matter of connecting the dots as far as all that's concerned. And then, of course, there's all that cell phone testimony that was admitted and added to the record. So there just seems to be this piling on at this point when it comes to this Fani Willis case, and it's just quite amazing. If you remember, I believe it's on March 7th of this month, there is a actual hearing before the Fulton County Board of Commissioners pertaining to two separate complaints filed by local citizens pertaining to ethics violations of Fani Willis. And if I remember right, that has to do with the actual case itself in the RICO case, and I believe misappropriating tax money pertaining to the Fulton County taxpayers. She really has a whole world of what to go through. So listen, let's go over this here. Let's talk about this for a few minutes. Gloria, thanks for joining us. I appreciate it. And I always like you listening when you're driving. Thanks for always tuning in. All right, we're going to go ahead. This is the 14th Amendment of the Constitution of the United States. This is the amendment that let me see if I can zoom in on this a little bit in case you're reading it with me. Obviously, if you're driving, I'll read it to you. Okay, so the 14th Amendment, I have my own personal notes I'm going to share in just a second so we know exactly when it was passed and exactly what scholars have said about this amendment. This amendment, keep in the back of your mind as we're going through this, it was not passed to give the states more rights as they were trying to do in this particular election. This amendment was passed to take power away from the states and to prevent conspirators and at that time, a conspirator was what we would call a Confederate. somebody that was a leader in the southern states. And they did not want these individuals who were leading in the rebellion, or I should say the actual separation, the war between the states, the Confederacy. They did not want their leaders to come back and be a leader in the government, period. And that was the reason behind the 14th Amendment. We're going to look at it in a second, but I believe it's Section 3 and Section 5. I don't know how the Democrats thought this was going to work, but it is so clear when you read this text that it's up to Congress to set the rules and procedures to determine if someone is an insurrectionist and determine what an insurrectionist is and if and when they should be removed. It's just that simple. Yet they were trying to tell each and every one of us that on its face, it's in legal terms, they call it self-fulfilling or self-executing. And that simply means that they don't need rules. They don't need a procedure. There's no reason for due process. It's, if you say that if it's yellow, well, then this happens. Well, it's not that simple. That's not what this 14th Amendment says. Now, the 14th Amendment is an important amendment. It gives us a lot of rights, guarantees us a lot of rights, but the sections they're talking about, they have, in my opinion, just taken completely out of context. And finally, before we read this, I want to also let you know that from the research I've done, they actually did have some rules in at one time pertaining to insurrectionists, but it was appealed by the U.S. Congress, I believe in the 1940s, 1930s, 1940s. So there is no rules for Congress. And this is one of the things that you'll see that the U.S. Supreme Court drilled down heavily on. So let's go ahead and get into this here. 14th Amendment. By the way, this is right here. It says state deprive any, it says, nor shall the state deprive any persons of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any persons within its jurisdiction the equal protections of the law. These are very famous phrases and quotes that we say and we hear all the time. So let's go ahead and skip down to the important sections that pertain to the Donald Trump case. We're going to read Section 3. And then you're going to see Section 5, if I remember right. If I'm wrong, we'll find out here in about a second. And we'll see exactly what it says. And then you can make up your own mind if this ever was something that pertained to Donald Trump. I have to say this also. 4 years ago, when this January 6th nonsense happened, they immediately called Donald Trump an insurrectionist. Now, why would I point that out? Well, I think they saw him coming. You know what that means? When I say it, it means somebody already thought of this. Somebody already knew what the Constitution said. They knew about the word insurrectionist. So as soon as this happened, these events unfolded, instead of calling it what it was, a riot at best, they started using the word insurrectionist. Surely you've seen that in the press. You've seen that in life, that if you hurry up and you label someone or something quickly, you have a better chance of that label sticking. And when that label sticks, it's hard to fight it off. Does that make any sense? Am I making any sense on that? It's just kind of the way that kind of works out. All right, Kim says that Team Willis, the phone records simply do not prove anything relevant. Yeah, we have that quote, standard filing. Thanks, Kim. That reminds me of the quote. I got it on one of the other screens. Maybe we'll look at it if we get time. What DA Willis said in response to that, as Kim pointed out, was basically, hey, these records don't show nothing. It just shows that this individual was in a multi-mile area with hundreds or thousands of businesses and homes. It doesn't mean anything. And of course, I heard one commentator say something beautiful. He said, you know what? She just gave every drug dealer, every criminal exactly what to say to a judge and or jury anytime that they're confronted with cell phone evidence. Just pretty shameful. So, all right, let's get back on it right here. Section 3, no person shall be a senator or representative in Congress or elector of president and vice president or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or under any state who, having previously taken an oath as a member of Congress or as an officer of the United States or as a member of any state legislator or as any executive or judicial official of any state to support the Constitution of the United States, shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. But Congress may, by vote of 2/3 of each house, remove such disability. Meaning, if someone is convicted under this Section 3, Congress can take a 2/3 vote and say it's okay. They get out of jail free card, basically. That's what that means. So there's a lot to talk about in this little paragraph, because the president said that this does not apply to the president. They list out an elector of the president and vice president, or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or under any state who haven't previously taken an oath. Okay, that's a lot of mumbo jumbo, but technically speaking, this doesn't count the president. And that was one of the things that the Supreme Court looked at. Had the founders intended for that to, or, I don't want to say founders, but at the time this was written up in the 1800s, had they intended for the president to be covered by this section, they could have easily wrote in there, President of the United States, but they did not. So let's continue. Now, Section 5 here, this is the important section here. It says the Congress shall have the power to enforce by appropriate legislation the provisions of this article. Okay, so Congress has to, that's it. The Congress shall have power to enforce by appropriate legislation the provisions of this article. Is there anything confusing about that? They have to have appropriate legislation, and they solely, Congress has the power to enforce. If there's no legislation, if there's no law, if there's no procedure set out by the Congress, then there's nothing that can be enforced. Does that make any sense? If you have any questions about that, put them in the comments below. That's the one thing weird about talking on a camera, unless you text it back to me, I cannot know if you understand what I'm trying to tell you. So let's move on to what, to my notes that I have here. I think this might help illustrate, because I can explain the difference in a few of the terms here that I think will help. Give me 1 second. I'm going to switch over on this here. We're going to stop sharing this particular screen. Stop sharing. Okay, let's go ahead and go. Now, these are notes that I have taken, and I kind of did a deep dive myself just so I could understand the difference between the terms. Here we go. Okay. And let me see if I can zoom in just a tad bit on this. I know it's sometimes it can be a little more difficult to read, so I'm going to zoom in just a digit for everybody. Okay, here we go. Yeah, this should be a lot nicer. Okay, so let's take a quick peek at this. All right. I always title it Get Trump. Now, this started, of course, with the Colorado Supreme Court ruling. The best way to defend democracy is to practice democracy. These were just quotes that were pertaining to this particular amendment here. And as I've said many times, the main point is that this entire issue goes beyond Donald Trump's eligibility to run for president. It has a significant concern that basically affects all of us, and that is, do we have a right to vote for who we want to vote for? I think it's really just that simple. It's not Donald Trump that we need to worry about. It's all of us that we need to be concerned with. So, and then I mentioned about them seeing us coming, so to speak. All right. Now, here's the problems. Here are many of the problems pertaining to this motion, or I should say this action taken by the Colorado Supreme Court. First of all, it's clearly unconstitutional. The specific amendment was put in the Constitution at the time after the Civil War to specifically keep people that were part of the Civil War from holding certain public offices. All right, we kind of touched on that. The enforcement and meaning of the section was specifically left to Congress only, and Congress has not passed laws or procedures to clarify how, if, and when this amendment is to be used. Okay, that just formalizes what we've been talking about. If this decision was left to stand, then it would mean that the impeachment of a president has been circumvented and that Congress is no longer the sole arbiter of removing a president. Now, what does that mean? As we probably already know, a president can be impeached. The impeachment is basically a simple majority in the House of Representatives for the impeachment. You saw, I believe it was Mayorkas that was recently impeached, the Secretary of Homeland Security, over the border issue. Now there's going to be a trial in the Senate, just like you would have for a president that's been impeached. We saw that with Donald Trump. We saw that with Bill Clinton. However, it takes a much higher standard in the Senate to have, I believe it's a 2/3 vote. It's a much higher standard to actually remove a president. And that's exactly what the founders wanted. They did not want to basically set up a parliament type of government where if there was basically a no confidence vote, we just go ahead and remove that guy. They did not want that. If you did that, you would just have a very weak and feckless presidency. That's exactly what that would qualify for. And none of us want that. We want a controlled but strong president of the United States. Otherwise, it's just like Britain. You ever notice the prime minister, they call him the prime minister of Britain? They can simply take a vote, have a no confidence vote, he's gone. And then they got to pick another leader. It's kind of similar in Israel. How many times have they had elections over there in the past 2 or 3 years? You've probably seen that on the news also, all right? Okay, insurrection is an impeachable offense. If Congress was to impeach the president on this type of offense, they would have to have had a vote in the House of Representatives and a 2/3 majority in the Senate to remove from office. If this provision stands, then you have unelected partisan judges that would decide if a president is removed instead of Congress, the way the framers intended. The court on the Colorado Supreme Court is made up of all Democrats. Did you know that? It's all Democrats that made this decision on the Colorado Supreme, quote unquote, Supreme Court. I made a note. If this stands, then this is a wildfire as it is going to spread, because Joe Biden will be the next to be removed and retaliation, because the term insurrection is not defined legally, and anything can be considered an insurrection. For example, Joe Biden's failure to secure the border. That was one of the points that I made in there. Currently, there's no procedure and no standard. And we need to ask questions. Do you need a conviction in a court of law? Does there have to be a certain vote taken? I mean, there's just no standard. There's no written rules. I made a note. You cannot have a provision that is self-enforcing or self-executing. There must be definitions, findings of fact, and the ability to put on evidence. The ability of an individual to have due process and to be able to put on evidence is absolutely key under our Constitution. I mean, it's one of our fundamental principles is this due process. What's ironic about it is the same 14th Amendment reiterates this due process provision and how important it is. So it just, it's almost goes in a circle. If you're not careful, you can get into some kind of circular reasoning here. So it's just, it's such a good thing that they would not allow this to stand. I made a note, the 14th Amendment does not apply to the president or the office of president. The founding fathers could have used specific language in the 14th Amendment, including the presidency, but they did not, as they did not intend it to cover the president. And I also made a note, the last time was 1860, that a president, Abraham Lincoln, the southern slave states removed his name. And of course, this was the beginning of the Civil War. Imagine that a judge, because this was a 1-vote majority, this Colorado decision was a 5-4 split, by the way, in case you're wondering. You'd have one judge that could decide an entire country's future and who would be president and what direction that they would follow. A lot of this we've already went over, so I'm going to skip to the most relevant points on there. But isn't that something? I put here the bottom line is this whole thing has to be taken into context. This 14th Amendment talks about slavery throughout, and that it is the lens in which this provision has to be taken. We have to look through this lens of the time in question in which it was written, of course, was the Civil War, or right after the Civil War. And it has to be looked at in that context. I also quoted or sourced a lot of this information from Wikipedia. It says, soon after losing the Civil War in 1865, the states that had been part of the Confederacy began to send unrepugnant former Confederates, such as the Confederates' former Vice President, Alexander H. Stephens, to Washington as senators and representatives. Congress refused to seat them and drafted Section 3 to perpetuate, against, someone help me with that, perpetuate, I got it, as constitutional imperative that anyone who violated their oath to the Constitution are to be barred from public office. Section 3 requires from federal or state offices anyone who haven't taken an oath as a public official to support the Constitution, which basically means engaging in insurrection or rebellion against the United States or giving aid or comfort to its enemies. Southerners strongly opposed it, arguing it would hurt reunifying the country. All right, so Section 3 does not specify how it is to be invoked, but Section 5 says Congress has enforcement power. And of course, we read that a minute ago, that it has to be up to the Congress to make and implement the rules, laws, procedures. So it's just that thing. And I made this note here too. Remember things when it comes to the law. You have to have two things in law. You have to have the law, which we call the elements, and you have to have case law. That's how it's interpreted. I had an attorney friend of mine teach me that years ago. So I want you all to kind of get this impression in your mind. Just because a law is a law doesn't mean it's necessarily the law. And you're like, what are you talking about? Word salad time, right? Well, what is written in the law is important, okay? But the courts, their job is to interpret the law, to tell us what that law says, to drill down on what it covers, what it doesn't cover. Also, it's their job to make sure the law is constitutional, that it does not violate the highest law in the land, which of course is the United States Constitution. Does that make any sense? You have to have the law, and then you have to have the courts interpret the law for you. Okay, and that's just a brief overview. I have one other illustration that comes to my mind. An attorney friend of mine years ago told me, hey, think of the law like this. It's a tire on your car, and the tire is going in a circle, of course, right? And the tire makes contact with the road. You've heard the expression where the rubber meets the road. Well, if you haven't, you heard it now. But anyway, where that tire hits the road, that's like the law. You have competing interest of the tire and competing interest of the concrete pushing against each other. And it's like that in the courts. And the job of the courts is try to call balls and strikes, if you will. Which way is this particular problem, law, rule? How are we going to interpret this, and how are we going to make sure it complies with the United States Constitution? That's just a brief overview that helps me make sense of what's going on, and I hope it helps you too. One quick thing I want to mention. If you want to talk about what a rebellion or an insurrection is, that is found in 18 U.S. Code 2383. If you just really love talking about that type of stuff, that's where you can find it, all right? And of course, former President Donald Trump has never been charged with insurrection. And the reason he hasn't been charged with insurrection is because the elements of the crime are not there. When this was happening, January 6th, at the Capitol building, guess what? Donald Trump wasn't there. He was there at I forgot what they call that park right there, but he was giving a speech at that park. That was it. He left after. He wanted to go to the Capitol. Secret Service wouldn't let him go. It was the crowd that went to the Capitol, and Nancy Pelosi refused 10,000 troops that she was offered to provide security. And gee, guess what happened? People violated space, and they went where they should not have went. I don't want to get into the January 6th fiasco at this point. The takeaway here is this is what they consider an insurrection / rebellion. They kind of dissect the terms right here. I don't want to get too deep in the weeds on this, but I did make some basic sentences. Here it is right here. To prove a violation of the law, 2383, USC, just so you know, that's the federal laws. Whenever you hear USC, I believe it stands for United States Code. Just that simple. Sometimes you'll see it as USCA, which means anointed, U.S. Code anointed. But anyway, USC 2383, the prosecution must establish the following elements. Okay, and there's 3 elements right here. The defendant knowingly incited, engaged in, or gave aid and comfort to a rebellion or insurrection. That's number 1. You have to knowingly do this. Number 2, the rebellion or insurrection was against the authority of the United States or its laws. And number 3, the defendant's actions were willful and intentional. That's the reason these type of things have to go to a jury, because it's almost always a jury question. It's hard to know or to prove someone's actions were willful and intentional, not or intentional, and intentional. You got to prove both of those in order to have a conviction for insurrection. I don't even know if the crime of insurrection is something that has been charged in recent history. That'd be a good question to look up. I just don't think I've seen that. So it's just an interesting thing to think about. So, okay, here's what I want to do. I'm going to switch over to this case law that or it's not a case law, it's actually a story that was put out at the time this decision was handed down. And I love the deep dive they did in this because they break down what the justices said pertaining to the actual conviction and not having a conviction. All right. So I think this works out really good. Kim, thanks for your comments on that. I appreciate it. What it says, how it does. Well, yeah, what it says. Perfect. Thank you. I appreciate everybody's comments, by the way. Then let's go to this next story, and then we're going to go back to a video. Let's see what we've got here. Okay, boom and boom. Okay, moving on. This is from CPR News. Colorado Supreme Court disqualifies Trump from the state's 2024 primary. There's a good-looking picture of our president right there, looking strong, large, and in charge. Not like the current president, Joe Biden, who looks like he just messed up his diaper and he's in a hurry somewhere. I shouldn't say that. We got to show a little more respect. Okay. In a landmark decision, the Colorado Supreme Court has ruled that former President Donald Trump is disqualified from appearing on the state's primary ballot next year. Let me zoom in on this just a little bit so we can all see it a little better. There we go. Okay. The justices 4-3 ruling. Remember, this was a split decision, if you will. The justices 4-3 ruling concludes that Trump engaged in an insurrection with his words and actions around the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol, and therefore cannot hold the nation's highest office again. We also are cognizant that we travel in uncharted territory, wrote the Colorado Supreme Court. And this is a 213-page decision. I'm glad I did not read that whole thing at the time. I believe the U.S. Supreme Court ruling today is like 21 pages, so it's much more something that we can read through or tolerate at least. Okay, this is the first time that the state's high court has concluded the 14th Amendment Civil War era disqualification clause applies to both the office of the presidency and the actions of the former president. Courts in Minnesota and Michigan dismiss similar complaints. We do not reach these conclusions lightly, wrote the justices. We are mindful of the magnitude and weight of the questions now before us. We are likewise mindful of our solemn duty to apply the law without fear or favor and without being swayed by public reaction to the decisions that the law mandates we reach. In a statement, the Trump campaign called the ruling a completely flawed decision that took away the rights of the Colorado voters to vote for the candidate of their choice, and said it would swiftly file an appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. And of course, they did that. We have full confidence that the U.S. Supreme Court will quickly rule in our favor and finally put an end to these unlawful lawsuits, said Stephen Chung, a campaign spokesperson. If the highest court agrees to hear the case, and of course they did, and if it's still in process when the Colorado ballot hits the certification deadline, the justice ordered Trump's name should be included on the GOP ballot. So they didn't actually take his name off the ballot at that time. Remember, he was allowed to keep his name on the ballot pending him filing an appeal with the U.S. Supreme Court. And of course, that's what he did. Now, I want to get into the breakdown of the decision here. Okay, the three members of the court, Chief Justice Brian Boatwright and Justices Carl Samore and Maria Bickernot filed dissent. So these were the three dissenting votes. All seven members of the Colorado's highest court were appointed by Democratic governors, though they first went through a bipartisan nomination process. But in Colorado, it's a heavily Democratic state, and all these individuals are Democrats. Make no mistake about it. The ruling overturns the finding of a district court judge that the disqualification clause does not cover the office of the presidency. It also reaffirms that under Colorado law, the court has jurisdiction to bar disqualified candidates from the Republican Party's primary ballot. They also concluded that the judicial branch is empowered to apply the clause. So one court down, the actual Colorado Court of Appeals said, hey, you cannot take Trump off the ballot. Then it was appealed to the Colorado Supreme Court, and of course, they reversed that decision. Congress, this is what the Supreme Court said Congress, the Colorado Supreme Court, Congress does not need to pass implementing legislation for Section 3 disqualification provision to attach the ruling. So Section 3, in that sense, is self-executing. This is where that self-executing stuff comes in that I was talking about. They all been hanging their hat that it was self-executing, meaning they don't have to have rules and or procedures outlined by the Congress. And of course, that's just simply not the case. You and I both read the Section 5 of the 14th Amendment, and we know exactly what it says. All right, it goes on. This tactic has been tried in other states, but none so far have reached Colorado's conclusion. Okay, we're gonna script on down because we don't want to talk about ancient history. I want to talk about the actual reasons why they said why they dissented from their peers. So here it is. Colorado's 3 justices who filed dissents opposed the ruling on different grounds. So in other words, they took different streets to get there, but the 3 Colorado dissenting justices said no for 3 different reasons. Okay, one of the justices concluded Colorado's judiciary does not have the jurisdiction to decide Section 3 claims. The justice argued that disqualifying Trump from the ballot when he has yet to be criminally convicted of anything would deny him due process. I totally agree with that. He says, I recognize the need to defend and protect our democracy against those who seek to undermine the peaceful transfer of power. And I embrace the judiciary's solemn role in upholding and applying the law, he wrote. But the solemn role necessarily includes ensuring our courts afford everyone who comes before them in criminal and civil proceedings alike due process of law. Folks, that's something that I think sometimes gets lost in reporting, lost in translation, if you will, and that is that Donald Trump is not above the law. That's very true. But guess what? He's not below the law either. He is entitled to the full rights that I am and that you are. And that's basically what this judge is saying. So let's see here. Moving on, it says the due process concerns were also echoed by another justice's dissent, which concluded there wasn't enough time for the courts to decide such a subjective and consequential election case. He noted it takes 2/3 votes of the U.S. Congress to overturn Section 3 disqualification. Again, we just read that. Such a high bar indicates that a expedited hearing, absent any discovery procedures, and with the preponderance of the evidence standard, is not the appropriate means for adjudicating a matter of this magnitude, the justice wrote. And I agree completely. So I think that's gives you a foundation of exactly what the problem is as far as those 3 justices see it, but the Supreme Court echoed exactly the same thing. So let's go back to the coverage that we had a second ago, and let's continue to listen in because I think they make some fantastic points in this, and then we will continue going through this case because it is important that we understand exactly what the 14th Amendment is and why it turned out the way it did. Thank God it turned out the way it did.
Maine, it was one unelected Secretary of State, and then you move over to Illinois, and they actually use the word suppress. I just want to quote them exactly. The Illinois State Board of Elections shall remove Donald J. Trump from the ballot or cause any votes cast for him to be suppressed. That is the word they use, the brazenness.
I thought Democrats were fighting against suppression.
Right.
I'm so confused. They need to make what rules they like on certain days clear because we can't keep up.
So thankful for Ketanji Brown Jackson, for Elena Kagan, for these justices appointed by Democrats, Sotomayor, who said the rule of law matters, democracy matters. This is Americans' institutions working.
Kim, I saw you nodding when Kayleigh hit the point of taking his name off the ballot, and you couldn't even write it in.
No, not even write it in. I love what you said. I thought they were supposed to be saving democracy. We need to know from day to day. But it's so true. And I've been reading a lot and going on TikTok for social media, getting the update. And they're like, you know what? It was bad behavior. So we need to get him off the ballot. I want each one of you to promise me right now you will not talk about my behavior behind the scenes. Because if we went on bad behavior to wipe people off of their jobs, I'd be working nowhere.
Yeah, you know what? When you put it that way, I want to bring in now Shannon Bream, chief legal correspondent, Fox News Sunday anchor. So Shannon, I don't know if you could hear the conversation, but when you put it the way that Kim Douglas just, I mean, it was almost like Colorado, Maine, Illinois, and some pending states want to cancel Donald Trump. They got all caught up, kind of woozy on the cancel culture.
I do think that there are some state officials out there who would be very happy to keep him off their ballots. They're not going to be able to do that now. But I would note also during the arguments, Chief Justice Roberts brought up the fact that, okay, if we say it's all right in this instance, that doesn't mean there won't be states that will say, okay, let's get some Democrats off the ballot then.
There you go.
And then what happens if you have a patchwork of states saying no Democrats candidate on our ballots, a patchwork of states saying no Republican ballot? Then what? Then you have a handful of states that have both the D and the R, and those are the only people who get to decide who is the next president of the United States.
Right.
I mean, in the opinion today, they talked about that as well. And this patchwork idea that Emily brought up, they said essentially that if you allowed states to do this, it would go against this idea, the principle that our country is based on, that the president represents all the voters of this country. And if you have only 20 or 30 states making that decision, it's very hard to say that's actually where we've gotten. So the justices spoke with this one voice. Again, there were the four justices who had their own explanation they wanted to offer. Justices Sotomayor, Jackson, and Kagan feeling that the broader opinion went too far and got into questions they didn't think needed to be decided. But I thought it was interesting that Justice Barrett kind of brings the whole thing together and said this: for our present purposes, our differences are far less important than our unanimity in this decision. All 9 justices agree on the outcome of this case, and that is the message Americans should take home.
I mean, that's amazing that they would actually make this.
I think that's an important point to make sure we put a heavy bold mark on. For present purposes, our differences are far less important than our unanimity. All 9 justices agree on the outcome of this case. That is the message Americans should take home. And yeah, that was Justice Barrett that wrote that in her opinion. I think that's the takeaway. There are some subtle things they disagree with as far as the scope of the case, if you will. However, a 9-0 vote is something that doesn't happen that often, and I think it is noteworthy, and I'm very proud of the court for making that decision. Gary, I like your comment. I appreciate God has his hand on Donald J. Trump. Biden and his cronies have no say in who runs for president. Makes them mad too. Absolutely it does. The liberals, I can assure you this, the liberals have went cuckoo today. They have been going nuts. Remember yesterday, they were really going off the deep end. Actually, it was 2 days ago, 3 days ago, whatever it was. They were really going off the deep end because the Supreme Court agreed to hear Donald Trump's appeals and stuff like this. Everybody was saying, oh, they're not going to take the case. Donald Trump doesn't stand a chance at immunity. You wait and see. He's going to be afforded immunity. If it's not total immunity, it's going to be good enough immunity. I cannot imagine that they're going to allow a nutty, crazy, corrupt DA like Fani Willis to indict a president for actions he did while he was the leader of the free world. He was a federal officer in the highest position in the land as the executive officer. I just can't imagine that the Supreme Court is going to allow that to stand. There's just something wrong there, and I'm assuming it's got to be stopped. And Carol, I agree with you. They call, the Teflon Don is okay. Only thing I don't like about that, they used to call John Gotti that. Y'all remember that back in the day? And then he ended up getting convicted one day and died in prison, of course. But he seems like he fares pretty well for whatever reason, and I hope he continues to do so because it's important that he does so.
This point in their comments. I mean, that's how critical a juncture that we're at in this country. Like, yes, we are divided on things, and thank goodness that we are. We would be so boring if we were all the same. We get together, we're a great country, but we have to be able to do it with civility. So, Shannon, as you were talking, I was thinking, what are voters in those states now who suddenly know today, ahead of Super Tuesday, that this is in some way settled? Now, look, those states can do what they want. They can still try to fight the good fight, but I'm pretty clear what 9-0 says in the U.S. Supreme Court. So now I'm wondering, you talk about excitement and intensity in the recent polling, and I know you've looked at this because I think you had it on Fox News Sunday just yesterday. When you look at the intensity among Democrats versus Republicans, imagine the intensity in these states that, particularly in Colorado, where people who wanted to vote for Trump can now say, and my vote will count.
Exactly, because these secretaries of state, these different officials in the different states said, we're going to let these names be on the ballot. Our decision is it shouldn't be there. And as Kayleigh pointed out, there was language that said, if President Trump loses this thing, we're not going to count these votes, whether they're write-ins, whether his name's on the ballot. But they put them on the ballots because they knew they were waiting this decision from the Supreme Court. So one of the briefs in the case talked about that and said, how are we supposed to ask people to go to these polls and to vote for President Trump with no guarantee that their vote's actually going to count or matter? You can't take that away from the voters. So everyone who goes out for Super Tuesday tomorrow in Colorado and Maine, who was at some doubt about whether their vote would count, it is going to count tomorrow. If you decide and choose to vote for the former president, Donald Trump, it's going to count.
All right. I just want to bring everybody's attention to the box on the left screen. We saw a little camera movement there, so I don't want to lose sight of what we're doing. And that is
Donald Trump's going to speak here. I don't know if you'll have the opportunity to see his comments or not, but I believe they're covered right here. At least in part they are. But he gave a little speech, and I thought it turned out pretty good. Actually, they're not going to cover it right here. Let me see if I can find his speech real quick, because it was it wasn't a long speech. It was 10, 15 minutes, but he took questions. You could definitely tell the difference in President Donald Trump and the difference in Donald Trump and, say, Joe Biden. That's very obvious as to what the difference is right there. But he went ahead and gave a speech from Mar-a-Lago earlier today, and let's see if they have it on here. I'll look real quick to see if we can pull that up. If I can't find it, we'll have to look at it later. But I thought his speech was good. I thought his speech was really good. Have y'all seen Nikki Haley and the stuff coming out of her mouth? What is going on with that? I mean, she's become, what she's become? She's become the new Liz Cheney, in my opinion. That's just my humble opinion. Let me try this one time. See, Trump speech today, tomorrow. See if it pulls up. If not, we'll try it. We'll try it here. I think this is it. Here we go. Take a look at this. I think you'll find this good. Here he goes. Much more composed. I call him Donald Trump 2.0.
Thank you very much.
Much more refined.
I want to start by thanking the Supreme Court for its unanimous decision today. It was a very important decision. We're very well crafted, and I think it will go a long way toward bringing our country together, which our country needs. And they worked long, they worked hard, and frankly, they worked very quickly on something that will be spoken about 100 years from now and 200 years from now. Extremely important. Essentially, you cannot take somebody out of a race because an opponent would like to have it that way. And it has nothing to do with the fact that it's the leading candidate, whether it was the leading candidate or a candidate that was well down on the totem pole. You cannot take somebody out of a race. The voters can take the person out of the race very quickly, but a court shouldn't be doing that, and the Supreme Court saw that very well. And I really do believe that will be a unifying factor, because while most states were thrilled to have me, there were some that didn't, and they didn't want that for political reasons. They didn't want that because of poll numbers, because the poll numbers are very good. We're beating President Biden in almost every poll. New York Times came out yesterday with a very big poll for us. So they didn't like that, and you can't do that. You can't do what they tried to do. And hopefully Colorado, as an example, will unify. I know there's tremendous support. They brought our support up very strong in Colorado, because people in Colorado thought that was a terrible thing that they did. And while we're on the subject, and another thing that will be coming up very soon will be immunity for a president, and not immunity for me, but for any president. If a president doesn't have full immunity, you really don't have a president, because nobody that is serving in that office will have the courage to make, in many cases, what would be the right decision, or it could be the wrong decision. It could be, in some cases, the wrong decision, but they have to make decisions, and they have to make them free of all terror that can be rained upon them when they leave office, or even before they leave office. And some decisions are very tough. I can tell you that as a president, that some decisions to make are very tough. I took out ISIS, and I took out some very big people from the standpoint of a different part of the world. Two of the leading terrorists, probably the two leading terrorists ever that we've ever seen in this world. And those are big decisions. I don't want to be prosecuted for it. Another president wouldn't want to be prosecuted for it. It had a tremendously positive impact. It stopped everything cold. And sometimes you have to make, they were tough decisions. Sometimes you have to make decisions like that. When you make a decision, you don't want to have your opposing party or opponent or even somebody that just thinks you're wrong bring a criminal suit against you or any kind of a suit when you leave office. I have that right now at a level that nobody's ever seen before. I have rogue prosecutors and I have rogue judges. I have judges that are out of control. And it's a very unfair thing for me, but serving perhaps as a sample to others of what should not be happening when you make good decisions. And in my case, the economy was great. We didn't go into any wars. We totally defeated ISIS. We provided the largest tax cuts in history. We provided the largest regulation cuts in history. But think of it, no wars. We beat ISIS 100% of the caliphate. And there were no wars. We did a job that was great, but maybe I wouldn't have done that. The caliphate, defeating them, was very powerful. It was going to take 4 years. It took me 4 months, but it was a very strong dictum that I gave. I said, get them, defeat them, end it. We were fighting for 20 years against ISIS, and we did it very quickly. I don't want to be prosecuted. In that case, it worked out very well. There will be some things that perhaps don't work out so well, but I don't want to be prosecuted because I decided to do something that is very much for the good of the country and actually for the good of the world. A president shouldn't have that on his mind, and he has to have a free and clear mind when he makes very big decisions, or it's going to be nothing more than a ceremonial post. You'll be president, it'll be a wonderful thing, and you won't do anything because you don't want to be hit by your opponent or hit by somebody else, because who wants to leave office and go through what I've gone through? I'm being prosecuted by Biden, my opponent, because every one of these things, whether it's Fani, Willis, or Bragg, these are local and state, but
they have to do something. You cannot have a continued situation where every president has to worry about some local yahoo indicting them for some action that they took while they were president of the United States. I know that one judge was asking, well, what if the president ordered SEAL Team 6 to kill the rival, his new rival or whatever? Well, if an order is given by a president and it's not lawful, well, you don't have to follow it. It's not a lawful order. But unfortunately, the attorney representing the president during that hearing did not respond like that. There has to be some kind of clear understanding put down by the court that you simply cannot go after a sitting and or former president in this capacity. It just has to stop.
They're in total coordination with the White House. You can't do that. It shouldn't be done. I mean, a thing like that. In the case of the DA's office, they put one of the top people, maybe the second person, in the Manhattan DA's office to get Trump. They had a Hillary Clinton lawyer leave the law firm, very prestigious big law firm, leave the law firm to go into the DA's office to get Trump, Pomerantz, Mr. Pomerantz. So he goes in to become a prosecutor, worked for the Democrat Party and Hillary Clinton, goes in to prosecute Donald Trump at a local level in total coordination with the Department of Justice, meaning Biden. And then you have the Fani Willis, or as she would say, Fani, F-A-N-I, Fani. And she hired somebody, knew the person long before this horrible prosecution took place. And she went out and she paid him an unbelievable amount of money, more money than he ever had dreamt possible, much more money than other people that do that for a living. He never did it at all, had no experience in it at all. And they had obviously a conflict. We don't have to go into that, but They were able to get a lot of money because it was a high profile person. Me, I'm a very high profile person. So they were able to pay him close to $1 million when he was not equipped to do the job, and she's not equipped to do the job, and that case should end immediately. That case is so conflicted, nobody's ever seen anything like it. And then you have deranged Jack Smith, who's a Trump hater and represents all the Trump haters.
While it's on my mind, I have a series that I am working on in addition to everything else pertaining to Jack Smith. Wait till you guys see the story behind Jack Smith, his failed prosecutions or persecutions, if you will, of the former governor of the great state of Virginia and his wife. He also was involved in another case with the current senator from New Jersey that's under a new federal indictment, Bob Menendez. This guy, Jack Smith, was the guy that prosecuted this Menendez guy the first time, and he lost. So he lost with Menendez. He lost with the governor and his wife over some kind of made up campaign finance rules that were just unreasonable that he was trying to hold him to. And then he took off and went to The Hague and was prosecuting war criminals over there. And now he's back here trying to chop the head off Donald Trump, which is just absolutely ridiculous. But stay tuned. I got a lot of cool stuff to show you about Jack Smith. When President Donald Trump says this guy's deranged, wait till my little series comes out and you tell me if you think it's accurate.
And he's going wild. He's just a wild man. He's been overturned unanimously by the Supreme Court. Went after other people over the years. He's had great failure, but he's mean, he's nasty, he's unfair. And the judges on these cases, they're all Trump haters, other than we have maybe one or two that I think can be fair. But you look at New York, what's happened. I mean, these people have tremendous hatred. You can't do this to a president. And again, I'm not talking about me. I'm talking about in the future. A president has.
You guys notice how I'm not talking about me. I'm talking about in the future. I'm talking about the good of our country. I love this. I don't want you to forget this. I don't want you to miss this. I think this is really good.
Has to be free. A president has to be, if the president does a good job, I did. Some people would say a great job. But if the president does a good job, a president should be free and clear and frankly celebrated for having done a good job, not indicted 4 times and not gone after on a civil basis and not demanded to pay hundreds of millions of dollars in fines on something that was absolutely perfect, where there were no victims, where the financial statements were absolutely flawless, where you have disclaimer clauses. I mean, nobody's ever had a thing like this. I wasn't given a jury, and I had a clubhouse judge just come up with this number on a perfect loan and very conservative financial statements. But even at that, if you look, the disclaimer says, don't rely on the financial statements in any way, shape, or form. Go out and do your own work. The bank in question had the most sophisticated lawyers in the world, frankly, one of the top law firms anywhere in the country. And they can defend themselves. What guys like Bragg and Letitia James and Fani and deranged Jack Smith, what they should be doing is fighting violent crime. And that would lead me to the end. I will say that President Biden, number one, stop weaponization. Fight your fight yourself. Don't use
this part that you're hearing. Remember the other day at the border, they had dueling border photo ops or video ops, whatever you want to call it. And Joe Biden was at the border and he said something to the effect of the president, hey, why don't you join me, Mr. President, and let's go ahead and secure this border. I think this is President Donald Trump's basic response to that. I love the way he kind of flips this.
Prosecutors and judges to go after your opponent, to try and damage your opponent so you can win an election. Our country is much bigger than that. The other thing I say to President Biden, close the borders now. This is not sustainable for our country. It's not sustainable for our cities. Our country is under siege. This is a violent thing that you've done. And many people are dying. Many people are dying. They die on the trip up. They die going through the border. And they die in our country. But many of the people coming up are from prisons and jails. from mental institutions and insane asylums. Many are terrorists. You see it. Many, many are terrorists. And I believe the real number that we have right now is probably closer to 15 million people. And by the time the term ends, I believe the president's term ends, I believe you'll be at close to 20 million people.
Can you imagine that? That's how many people coming across the border per year and per each presidential term. Just to give you guys some comparison, during the time that all of us white people came over here from Europe, which was approximately 18 something through, let's just say, the beginning of World War II, just to give you a comparison, you're talking 10 million Europeans crossed the Atlantic. You heard what he just said, 12 million, 15 million, 10 million, whatever, just to show you the volume of people coming across the border right now. I don't know how any country can maintain that type of increase in the population. Do you?
That's almost larger than any state in the union. Our country, it is not sustainable. Many of these people are tough. Many of these people are bad. They come from some of the roughest countries in the world and some of the roughest prisons. We have prisons in the Congo, in Africa, coming. We have people coming from all parts of the Middle East. They're coming from Yemen, and
I want to make one real quick comment. I just don't want anything I say to be misinterpreted. It has nothing to do with the individuals coming across being any particular race or being Hispanic or anything. I think I've mentioned before, my girlfriend is a Venezuelan woman. And so it has nothing to do with the race. It has to do with having a border, having a country that's secure. Without a border, you don't have a country. And if I'm being perfectly honest with you, they probably should allow all the good-looking Venezuelan women to come across. I wouldn't mind that. But at any rate, I just want to be clear, make sure everybody understands. I don't want anybody to get bent out of shape on a comment.
Yet you were bombing Yemen. You have to stop. You have to close the border. You have absolute authorization. You don't need Congress. I had the safest border in the history of our country, and I didn't use Congress for it. And then I built hundreds of miles of wall. And the reason I built it and how I built it was I considered it an invasion of our country. And I took the money from the military, and the Army Corps of Engineers did it with me, and we did a great job. And we had the safest border we've ever had, and now we have the most unsafe border anywhere in the world at any time. There's never been a border like this at any country, anywhere in the world. They would have fought with sticks and stones to stop the horrible situation that's occurring. Our people can't stand it, and the people coming in really can't stand it because they're dying. Many are dying on the trip up, and they're dying in the country. And also, many of the people are criminals, and they're doing tremendous harm. I call it migrant crime. It's migrant crime. It's a new category of crime. They're hurting our country horribly, and we've become a laughing stock all over the world. So I say respectfully to President Biden, you have the authorization right now. I did it. I didn't go to Congress and say, do I have the right to close? I fought Congress on it. Close the borders. You can do it right now. You have everything. Use my policies. My policies were great. Everybody said it. Use my policies. So just to finish, I have great respect for the Supreme Court, and I want to just thank them for working so quickly and so diligently and so brilliantly. And again, this is a unifying factor. Everybody now is together, and they can go after me as a politician. They can go after me with votes, but they're not going to go after me with that kind of lawsuit that takes somebody out of a race who's leading in this case, but even if the person wasn't leading. And I want to thank you all for being here. Do we have any questions? Yes.
Mr. President, the poll numbers are massive for you going into Super Tuesday. We found that a lot of people that were agnostic to politics in general see these legal cases against you. They see how life was back under a Trump administration. Do you think that's the key to pull some of these independent voters into this next election, seeing that legal cases are unfair, they have no merit, and also the poll numbers and their life before Trump?
It's such an interesting question because historically, a thing like what I've been going through would have hurt a political party or a political candidate terrifically. You wouldn't even run. You wouldn't be able to run. You'd get out. This has happened over many years, many times. In this case, I mean, the polls show that I'm much more popular than I was before weaponization. It's been weaponized like it's never been. This is for third world countries. This isn't for us. Biden ought to drop all of these things. And frankly, he may do better if he does, because people would say, wow, that was very reasonable. Look, they're all, the state, the city, and the federal, they're all coordinated. Fani Willis's lover spent hours and hours at the White House, I guess with White House counsel and with DOJ.
That's right.
Plotting out this plan. Nobody talks about that. They're all coordinated with the White House. It's weaponization. Never been done in this country. It's been done in third world countries, banana republics, never in this country. So I really believe what they should do is really go all the way, go out and stop all of this nonsense. They're nonsense cases and everybody sees it. You just look at Atlanta. It's such an embarrassment to Georgia, what's happening there. But Jack Smith, I don't think is any better. Letitia James is terrible. She campaigned on, I will get Trump, I will get Trump. And then it goes before a Trump-hating judge. I mean, the whole thing is a rigged deal. And the public understands it. I'm lucky that I'm able to explain it to the public, because if you weren't able to explain it, the public wouldn't know. They'd believe what they see. So I don't want to win this way. Look, I want to win based on my policies are better. We're going to cut taxes. We're going to get interest rates down. You're going to be able to buy homes again. I mean, you can't buy.
I love this part. He's like, hey, you know, don't feel sorry for me. I'm not a victim. I don't want to win this way through the courts. I don't want to have someone give me anything. I want to win fair and square at the ballot box. So drop all this nonsense and let's do things the correct way for the benefit of the country.
Buy a home today. The interest rates are so high. I want to win on safe borders. I want to stop wars. I want to stop the war in Ukraine with Russia. I want to stop what's happening in Israel. Israel would have never been attacked if I were president. Ukraine would have never, ever been attacked if I was president. You wouldn't have had inflation. Inflation was caused by high energy prices. I had low energy prices. I would have kept them there very easily. And it probably maybe caused the war with Ukraine, because Putin became rich all of a sudden. It went up so much. And I watched President Biden talking about Putin. Putin became very rich because at $100 a barrel, he's got so much money to fight a war. At $40 a barrel, he doesn't have the money to fight a war. But he wouldn't have done it anyway because I told him not to. So I just want to thank all of you for being here. I think it's a very big day for America. I think it's a very big day for liberty. And I think it's just a great day for this country. Again, I hope it's unifying like I think, but it is. It's a big step toward unification. I hope that the justices, because they'll be working on some other cases, but one in particular, presidents have to be given total immunity. They have to be allowed to do their job. If they're not allowed to do their job, it's not what the founders wanted, but perhaps even more importantly, it will be terrible for our country. Thank you all very much.
All right. That was a pretty good speech. I think this new Donald Trump is exactly what we need. He is, I've been calling it, I'm sure y'all have heard me say this before. It's Donald Trump 2.0. Instead of the angry Donald Trump. Now, obviously he has his moments, understandably. I'd be angry too at times, but he's much more refined. He's much more calm. You don't always see that angry, vindictive side necessarily. He's the speech that we just heard. That's the speech of somebody running a national campaign. This time he knows what he's doing to run for president. He has a professional team put together. I heard somebody talk about the other day how what was it? They had like everything on computer or by street, knowing who's a Democrat, who's a Republican, who's likely to vote, who's not, and they're able to target these individuals, if you will, to make sure that they have their vote. If they have any questions, they reach out to them. They make sure that they are going to vote or that they have a ride to the polls. And most importantly, President Trump is working hard to beat the Democrats where they're strongest, and that is in their mail-in ballot campaign, which is something that is concerning because it is ripe with fraud, or at least the potential for fraud. he's a man that seems like he's focused. That's just my take on it, my opinion. I'm curious if y'all agree with me on that. I didn't see anybody respond to my question, and if you're driving and whatnot, I get it. Everybody's busy, probably on your way home from work. But what I wanted to know is, what do you think? Do you think this is the speech of a normal Donald Trump, or you think this is Donald Trump 2.0, like I've been talking about? You think he's more focused or not? I'm just curious if y'all share that opinion or not, because that's the way he comes across to me. American Nana, I appreciate your comments. Now the perjury, you talking about Fani Willis, I'm assuming. We're gonna be talking about her a little bit later on. Let me switch to this next video because I want to get the comments from a defiant Secretary of State, a Colorado Secretary of State, despite this fantastic and wonderful decision by the U.S. Supreme Court today. If you're just joining us, we're talking about the 9-0 decision from the U.S. Supreme Court today in the case of Trump versus Anderson, which of course is the ballot ruling. And I wanted y'all to hear this little clip that I found. And it's interesting to me because they also have a comment from this Secretary of State. These people just really think they're better than me and you. I don't really think you can say it any other way. Yeah, Kim, you think he's 2.0 too? I also agree with you, Kim. 2.0, absolutely. He's just on top of it. He just seems different. When I heard him in an interview, I can't remember the reporter's name off the top of my head. She is a liberal reporter. She's younger. I don't really know what race she is, but she's a beautiful woman. And she asked very pointed. I'll see if I can't find the interview for next time and show you. She was really trying to zoom in and zero down on the abortion question, which obviously is a very sensitive subject in American politics. And it's the reason I believe the Republicans had such serious problems in the 2022 election and, of course, in the 2020 election. But without getting off target, I love the way President Trump handled that question at that time in that particular interview. And I also believe that's the reason why Nikki Haley, despite whatever polls they try to pull up showing otherwise, there's no way Nikki Haley at this point can win a national election. But we'll talk about that as we go forward. So anyway, let's go and take a peek at this. Tell me what y'all think about this, and listen to how smug this Secretary of State is from the state of Colorado.
Well, the big breaking news story this morning, former President Trump will stay on the ballot for the primary here in Colorado that's happening tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly. Right on the heels of Super Tuesday, about as close as it can get. Let's get out to Drew with some of the latest reaction pouring in this morning.
Well, reaction from the former president himself. This is at 8:03 on Truth Social, and we got the decision from the Supreme Court, a 20-page writing, 20-page decision. And this is what he said: big win for America at 8 o'clock, and then this at 8:03, some minutes later. Now, for many analysts that listened to those oral arguments nearly a month ago, it was February 8th, this is the outcome that many predicted: a unanimous decision by the justices that the former president's name cannot be removed from the ballot by a state, and specifically in this case by the state of Colorado. Let's go over this opinion, this 20-page opinion that we received from the justices this morning. On page 3, it says, raised a single question: did the Colorado Supreme Court err in ordering President Trump excluded from the 2024 presidential primary ballot? Concluding that it did, we now reverse. Now on to a part why they felt they needed to rule on this in the first place. It said the patchwork that would likely result from state enforcement would sever the direct link that the framers found so critical between the national government and the people of the United States as a whole. And essentially, here to sum it all up, the judgment of the Colorado Supreme Court is reversed. The mandate shall issue forthwith. To get you caught up on the story, let's take a live look at the Supreme Court building this morning, because just last month, inside of that building, justices heard arguments over whether Colorado could ban the former president from its ballots, citing the 14th Amendment, accusing him of engaging in an insurrection after the 2020 election. Since then, 2 other states, Illinois and Maine, have made similar arguments. And what happened this morning will obviously strike those down as well. And we just got a tweet from Colorado Representative Lauren Boebert about this as well, as reaction continues to pour in. She says, vindication at last. President Trump will remain in the Colorado ballot. The SCOTUS has made their ruling official. Yet another swing and miss from the loony left. Trump 2024. Of course, we brought you last hour the response that we got from Colorado Secretary of State Jena Griswold, and we're also waiting to hear from the former president. We have some cameras set up at Mar-a-Lago. There you see it right there, live look. He is expected to take to the microphone there and deliver remarks after what we heard from the Supreme Court justices. Just about 8 o'clock this morning is when that 20-page opinion came down. And again, Kirk and Lisa, not a surprise. Many analysts predicted that this would be a unanimous decision simply in the fact that states, they do not want controlling something like this, the presidential election. So we'll continue to track more. And of course, when the former president takes the microphone there, we'll bring that to you live.
And we do have some local state reaction we want to get to right now. We've got Secretary of State Jena Griswold.
This is her, just so you know, this is the Secretary of State, Colorado. Look at that smug face. She's just proud of herself. She's in front of the cameras. She's going to go down in history for all time that she's the one defending this case, just like the woman, the Secretary of State out of, what was that, Maine? These people just all want to, they don't care anything about the country, folks. They only care about themselves. They only care about having their picture taken, being in the history books. It's just shameful, despicable and shameful.
Joining us here this morning, obviously a historic decision here. What is your reaction to this announcement and it being a unanimous decision?
Thanks for having me on. First and foremost, I think it's great that they actually issued a decision. As of Thursday night, over 400,000 ballots were already cast in the Republican presidential primary. And Coloradans and Americans all across the country deserve to know whether Donald Trump is a qualified candidate. With that said, I also am disappointed. I disagree with.
Hang on a second. You'll have to, let me see if I can do this right. There were 440,000 people that voted in this election, and they, I'm sorry, I just couldn't help myself. That's just what she reminds me of.
Their decision. But of course, like I've always said from the beginning, I will follow it. Donald Trump is on the ballot, and we will be counting votes cast for him in the presidential primary.
Well, and Secretary Griswold, they essentially said that the states don't have the power to use this to pull somebody off the ballot. Is that the point you disagree with? I mean, what would you have liked to have seen come out of this? Because the court made it clear in their arguments that they were concerned if they allowed this in Colorado, what would other states do?
Yes, that's exactly right. I do believe that states have the ability under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment to decide to not put on our ballots oath-breaking insurrectionists. The United States Supreme Court disagrees with that and says Congress has to act first. Congress has to pass some type of law allowing Section 3 of the 14th Amendment to be applied. I think the bigger picture for me is just the general reason Section 3 of the 14th Amendment is in the United States Constitution. And that's an understanding that having people in office who break their oath, engage in insurrection or rebellion, and then run for office again is dangerous.
She forgets to tell you what else is in the 14th Amendment, like we looked at earlier. She conveniently leaves out that the Congress has to set up rules to determine who's an insurrectionist and what procedures, rules, what's required. All of that is conveniently left out. And she also forgets to tell you that President Donald Trump has not been convicted of anything, much less insurrection. And even right now today, with 91 or so felonious charges against him, not one of them, not one, pertains to him committing quote unquote insurrection.
Now, this decision focuses a lot on federal candidates. So it would apply to, of course, candidates for the presidency, but also other federal candidates for Congress or United States Senate as well.
And of course, we know you were in D.C. for these oral arguments, certainly a big part of this entire factor here. Can you break down a little bit about, this is coming up on the heels of Super Tuesday, obviously. Is this going to change how anything plays out tomorrow? Have you guys kind of been preparing for this?
From the point of view of administering the election, nothing changes. Taking a step back before the United States Supreme Court, the Colorado Supreme Court disqualified Trump, but said, put him on the ballot if there was an active appeal. So Donald Trump has always been on our ballot. Ballots went out the week of February 12th. I think that the big difference is not the administration of elections, but just the clear understanding for voters that if they vote for Donald Trump, that vote will be counted.
And do you see this as the end of the road for this argument? I mean, the Supreme Court is the law of the land, right? Is there any room for more legal challenges?
This is the partial end of the road, and I think logistically very much the end of the road. The Supreme Court left open the door for Congress to act. We have nearly non-functioning Congress at this point. I think it's highly unlikely that Congress will act to pass legislation enabling the Section 3 of the 14th Amendment to apply.
No, Nana, don't go anywhere yet, sweetheart. Let me take a second and tell you real quick. The 2.0 is just an expression. That's all there is to it. Don't read too much into it. You know how sometimes you update your phone and it's version 12 or whatever, and then there's a new update and it's version 12.1, something to that effect. That's all I'm trying to get across with Trump 2.0, the first Trump, if you will, during the first election. He was a novice. He really didn't know what to do or what to expect. He would pretty well just say what he wanted to say without a filter. He still does that at times, but to me, in my mind, that's why I was asking if you all agree or not, or if you disagree. In my mind, he's much more refined. His questions are well thought out. You can say what you want to him. He generally doesn't get angry. The interview with that reporter, I'll try to pull that interview and play it for y'all so you can see what I'm talking about. Even though she is peppering him with questions that would normally aggravate someone like me, he's just cool and calm, and he thinks about it. And when someone interrupts him, if you notice, instead of getting mad or upset, I love the way he does it. What does he say? He says, excuse me, and then he continues to say what he wants to say. I'm just saying he's a pro, and it shows. I hope he can maintain that demeanor, that what I just call it Trump 2.0, but that's what I mean by it, American Anna. I just mean that he is doing better than the first time around. I hope that was okay and that y'all understand what was going on. So anyway, I just want to kind of give everybody that. So stick around. We're going to get right back into this video here.
To this year's election. Ultimately, it will be in the hands of Coloradan and American voters. The big question is whether American voters will stand up and protect democracy. They have done so time and time again, and I'm confident that it will happen again this year. And I am very confident and know we'll have great elections in the state of Colorado.
All right, Secretary of State Jena Griswold, thanks so much for making time for us here this morning, giving us your insight on this issue.
All right, so I thought that was an interesting little take. Does she look kind of smug, or is it just me? I mean, she just kind of got this smug, arrogant look to her. I don't know. Maybe I need to take a page and become J.R. Dukes 2.0 instead of just letting that stuff strike me as being irritating or whatnot. So, okay. Now, the next thing I want to look into is something funny. I want to show something a little bit funny. Have y'all seen the what is it called? Inside Politics on SNL. I can't show this in its entirety, but I can show you a couple quick sections of it for reasons involving copyright and stuff like that. But I just want to show you a couple clips on this because this is hilarious. And it illustrates the point that I've been talking about. We've all been talking about, and that is whether or not Joe Biden has issues pertaining to, well, let's just say issues that would prevent him from serving is probably the best way to describe the situation with him. So anyway, let's take a peek at it. It was just kind of funny the way they put some of this. It just goes through this list that is just hilarious, and and everybody in this skit is talking about how how the White House is saying, oh, he's so vigorous. I think the funniest one that I'll show you was right near the end. We have all had grandparents and whatnot that have had an issue or two. Let's see if I can get it to cue in exactly where I want it. But you know how when you talk to someone older that might not be familiar with phones or whatnot, this is kind of where this is coming from. So that was pretty cool. So I'm not normally a fan of watching Saturday Night Live all the time, but I will tell you that when Saturday Night Live starts making fun of you as a Democrat, you might have a problem, and maybe something you want to check out. So that just goes without saying. That's just my opinion. So, folks, here's what I'm going to do. We've been on almost 2 hours already. We all need a break. I'm going to try to come back in about an hour or two. So leave your notifications on. If you're still with me, you might as well go ahead, hit the thumbs up button, subscribe, like, comment, all that good stuff. Let's pick it up in a little while. What I'd like to do is come back later and we're going to start drilling right down on the Supreme Court decision. It's about 20 pages, if I remember right. And we should be able to get through it in about an hour. I think it's a good read, and we get to see the insight and what all these justices were thinking when they came up with this opinion. I think it is nothing short of a work of art, and thank God that the Supreme Court ruled the way they ruled, not for Donald Trump's sake, but for the sake of the United States of America. My friends, I always tell you, keep that mind free and never give up. And until next time, hopefully in a couple hours or so, I am J.R. Dukes.